Well, good evening, friends, and welcome. I'm Chris Vallillo, and I'm very happy to have you here with me this evening as I celebrate the legacy and the life of one of America's greatest presidents, Abraham Lincoln. Now, as we face this national crisis, it seems like the perfect opportunity to reflect back on Lincoln the man and Lincoln the leader and draw lessons from him. Now, I'm co-hosting this event tonight with two very important organizations, the Looking for Lincoln Heritage Coalition and the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area. And I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about those two groups. The Looking for Lincoln Heritage Coalition is a not-profit organization that helps communities in the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area tell their unique Lincoln story and support heritage tourism. The Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area is a 43-county area with 28 designated Looking for Lincoln communities who work collaboratively to preserve and tell the story of Lincoln's life and times here in Illinois. Now, I have personally worked with these organizations many times over the years, and I can tell you firsthand they do wonderful and important work, and I want to thank them very much for helping to make this happen. Now, this evening I'm going to perform a show called Abraham Lincoln in Song. And it's a show I originally created for the Lincoln Bicentennial back in 2009. And in this show I will use Abraham Lincoln's own words, stories he used to tell, and historic period music directly associated with Lincoln as a vehicle to tell his life's story. So that being said, pull up a chair and relax. This is Abraham Lincoln in Song. Well, they say April the 14th, 1865 was a beautiful day in Washington, D.C. Spring was in full bloom and peace had finally come to the war-torn nation. That afternoon, as Abraham and Mary Lincoln went for their carriage ride in the countryside surrounding Washington, D.C., well, they held hands and they seemed cheerful for the first time in years. Abraham spoke with Mary about the things they would do now that the dreadful days of the Civil War were finally over. And friends, as he enjoyed that beautiful spring afternoon, a curious thing began to happen. Lincoln began to cast his mind back over the years and speak to Mary about that long and difficult journey that brought them both to this unique moment in American history. Now, for Lincoln, the journey began 56 years earlier, February the 12th, 1809, when he came into the world at a dirt-floored log cabin down on the Big South Fork of Nolan's Creek, way down in Kentucky. Lincoln's then 10-year-old cousin, a little fellow named Dennis Hanks, he would later describe the Lincoln family by saying, "Well, heck, them Lincolns wasn't poor. Why, they was poorer and poor." Now, it was a subsistence life of hunting and trapping and chopping trees and grubbing roots. But when Abraham was just 2 years old, his father, Thomas Lincoln, moved the family 10 miles away to a place called Knob Creek, right on the Louisville-Nashville Turnpike. Now, that's one of the most important highways in all of American history. And it's here that preachers and peddlers and politicians, well, heck, even scientists, all stopped by the Lincoln doorway. And it's also here that a young and inquisitive Abraham first heard stories of the lands beyond. Wild tales of exaggeration of a new Garden of Eden flowing with milk and honey. He heard stories of prairie grasses, they said, that were taller than a man on horseback. Oceans of blue irises as far as the eye could see. Fields of wild strawberries that were so big and so plentiful, while they said a man would stain his horse's legs red if he tried to ride through them. Rivers teeming with mink, beaver, otter. And he heard stories about soil. Soil, they said, that was so rich and fertile, why a man didn't even have to plow it up to plant a crop. Oh no. All you got to do is grab a handful of corn kernels and throw them down at the ground. But you better jump right back, because the ears would spring forth full grown, knock a man clean over if he wasn't careful. Well, needless to say, all these wild exaggerations inspired countless new pioneers to light off for these new lands. Right about that time, this song was written. A song that preserved many of those exaggerations in its lyrics, and a song that Abraham Lincoln himself would later claim as one of his very favorites. Way down upon the Wabash, such a land was never known. If Adam had crossed over it, why this land he'd surely own. He'd say, this is the garden he lived in when he was a boy, and he'd straightway pronounce it Eden in the state of Illinois. So move your families westward, bring all your girls and boys, and cross the Shawnee Ferry to the state of Illinois. Now here's some more of that exaggeration I was talking about. Why, it was here that the Queen of Sheba came with Solomon of old, with wagon loads of spices, pomegranates, and fine gold. But when she saw this lovely land, why, her heart was filled with such joy. Straightway said she, I'd like to be the Queen of Illinois. So move your families westward, good health you will enjoy, and rise to wealth and honor in the state of Illinois. Yes, move your families westward, bring all your girls and boys, and cross the Shawnee Ferry to the state of Illinois. Now, in 1816, Thomas Lincoln, like so many before him, gave in to the lure of those new lands, and he rafted the family across the Ohio River to a place in southern Indiana called Pigeon Creek. Now, friends, the Indiana wilderness was a place of hardship and struggle. But for the Lincoln family, that struggle was eased somewhat by the beautiful singing of Abraham's mother, Nancy. She had a gorgeous voice and was renowned throughout the region for her singing. As a matter of fact, Lincoln would later state his very first memories of awe were the sound of his mother singing the Lincoln children to sleep at night. Now, Nancy was always partial to those sad old Appalachian mountain ballads, and Abraham always said her favorite song of all was that beautiful old song, Barbara Allen. In Scarlet Town, where I was born, there lived a fair maid dwelling, made many a youth cry well a night. Her name was Barbara Allen. All in the merry month of May, when green buds they were swelling, young Jimmy Grove on his deathbed lay, for love of Barbara Allen. But in 1818, that beautiful voice was silenced when Nancy Hanks Lincoln, weakened by bouts of malaria, well, friends, she died. Now, she died of what was called the milk sick. And this was a poisoning you got by drinking the milk of a cow that had eaten a local weed, white snake root. And it was the first of many tragedies that would touch Abraham Lincoln's life. He was devastated by the loss of his mother. But you know, a man couldn't raise a family on his own in the Indiana wilderness, not in 1818. So after a respectful period of mourning, Tom Lincoln headed back to Hardin County, Kentucky, where he married himself a widow lady by the name of Sarah Bush Johnson. Now, friends, Sarah was a no-nonsense kind of woman who immediately came in and took over as head of the Lincoln household and mother to the Lincoln children. And in the years that followed, Abraham grew to be a strapping young man, tall and sinewy, known for his quick mind and his even quicker wit. And even at this tender young age, friends, Abraham Lincoln was notorious for pulling a practical joke. As a matter of fact, Sarah would later talk about one that he pulled on her right about this time. Now, as we all know, Lincoln's becoming uncommonly tall for the era. He would grow to be 6'4", which is about like that compared to me. No big deal today, but in Lincoln's day, that was very, very unusual. He got so big that he had to duck down just to get into the log cabin. Well, one day, he was distracted reading one of the books that Sarah brought with him, and sure enough, he banged his forehead on the freshly whitewashed lintel post that goes across the top of the doorway. Now, Sarah saw this, and she thought she'd tease him a little bit, and she says, "Now, Abraham, I don't mind you tracking mud into my clean floors. I can bend down and wipe that up. But boy, I can't reach my fancy whitewashed ceilings. You best be more careful than that." Well, Abe didn't like being the butt of her jokes one bit, so he decided he would get even, and here's what he did. He waited till that afternoon when she was off visiting the neighbors. And then he got a local kid to help him out. Fell about maybe yay big. He had him take off his shoes and socks and go traipsing through a mud puddle in his bare feet. Well, then young Abraham picked that kid up, carried him into the log cabin, flipped him upside down, and walked his muddy feet across his mother's fancy white ceiling. Well, later that afternoon, Sarah came walking back, and by this time, Abraham was beginning to have second thoughts as to the wisdom of his actions. So he hid himself away to see how she'd react. Well, sure enough, Sarah comes walking into that house, takes one look at those muddy footprints on her fancy white ceiling, and she falls down in a cane-bottomed chair and busts out laughing. So Abraham knew it was okay. But, friends, the joke ended up being on him. Because you see, when they finished laughing, he very wisely told Sarah that he'd go out to the lime bucket and mix up a new batch of whitewash and fix her ceiling for her. But when he went out to that bucket, it was empty. And young Abraham Lincoln, he had to walk 5 miles to the nearest store, where he had to purchase a sack of lime, throw it on his shoulders, walk 5 miles back home, and then he still had to mix up that batch of lime and paint himself that ceiling for his mother. Now, since Abraham was becoming so large and strong, his father Thomas decided to take advantage of that. He would hire him out to the neighbors, doing day labor things, plowing fields, pulling up stumps, splitting those rails that he was well known for. Well, Abraham figured out pretty quickly he didn't like that hard manual labor. He wanted to work with his brains, not his back. So in 1826, he got a job he did like. He was hired to operate the ferry down at Anderson Creek on the Ohio River. Now, this is the first time that Abraham Lincoln will see rivermen and flatboaters. Now, in 2 years, in 1828, he takes the first of 2 trips, working as a deckhand on a flatboat going all the way down to New Orleans, Louisiana. And historians will tell us that it's on this first trip that Abraham is so appalled at the treatment of the slaves at the New Orleans slave auction, it sets his mind against slavery, and Lincoln is heard to state, "If I ever get the chance to hit this thing, I'll hit it hard." Now, those flatboats I spoke of, they're the most common boats on the Ohio and the Mississippi River in these days. And you know, they're nothing more than a glorified raft. Some of them 20 foot wide, maybe 50, 60 foot long. You'd have a tent on the back for the men to sleep in, and they'd fill it with all kinds of trade goods to take down to New Orleans and such. Now, in Lincoln's day, everything was muscle power. There were no motors. So they'd steer it with a big long oar that came off of the back, what they call the beach oar. And then, to power it, they'd line up men on the long sides of the boat. They'd drive those poles in the mud of the river bottom and pull or pole the boat forward. And that was a hard job. And you had to work together as a team. And they did it through music, work songs. They would just sing a work song, and then everyone would work in the rhythm of the song they sang. Now, I happened to come across an old Ohio Valley flatboaters work song that young Abraham Lincoln himself may very well have known and sung. It was well known in his area and in his time. But before I do the song, I want to get you back to that place. So first of all, imagine it's the year of 1828. You're lounging on the banks of the Ohio River. And as you sit back, leaning there, enjoying the sun on your face, you gaze off stream, and way in the distance, there's an itty-bitty speck of something slowly drifting down your way. And as it gets a little closer, why, heck, you can tell it's one of those flatboats, piled high with all kinds of trade goods going all the way down to New Orleans, Louisiana. And as it gets a little closer still, you can begin to hear the sounds of those poles as they slap that water in a slow, almost hypnotic sound. Something they say a little like this. Now as they get a little closer still, you can start to hear the sounds of somebody scratching on an old fiddle, making a little music. And as they get closer still yet, you can hear the words of the song they're singing. Well, some pulls up, but we float down way down Ohio to Shawnee Town, and it's hard on the beach. She moves too slow way down to Shawnee Town on the Ohio. Yeah. Now it's hot in the summer, boys. Air is thick and dank. That darn old fog so heavy that I cannot see the bank. And it's hard on the beach. She moves too slow way down to Shawnee Town on the Ohio. Oh yeah. Now the current's got her, boys. We'll take up some slack. We'll float her down to Shawnee Town and we'll bushwhack her back. And it's hard on the beach. She moves too slow way down to Shawnee Town on the Ohio. Oh! Now I got a wife in Louisville, one in New Orleans, and when I get to Shawnee Town, gonna see my Indian queen. And it's hard on the beach. She moves too slow way down to Shawnee Town on the Ohio. Yes, it's hard on the beach. Oh, she moves too slow way down to Shawnee Town on the Ohio. In 1830, Abraham Lincoln turns 21 years old. And folks, that was a big deal. Matter of fact, they even had a special name for it. They said that a man reached his majority at the age of 21. Now, up to that point, whenever Abraham had been hired out to work on a farm, or even when he took that flatboat trip down to New Orleans, he was expected to return home and turn over all of his earnings to his father. Now, you were quite literally an indentured servant until you turned 21. Then you were a free man. Well, right about this time, Thomas Lincoln announces that he's going to move the family one more time. This time to that Illinois place he's heard about for years and years. Well, Abraham stays and helps the family make that move, gets the new log cabin built, and helps them get through that first terrible winter. And then that spring, he lights out on his own. And this is when he takes his second trip down to New Orleans. Only this time, he's not a deckhand on the flatboat. Lincoln is hired by the man that had him the first time to build and captain a boat of his own. And he was doing great too. Had the boat all built, stocked full of provisions, and was heading down the Sangamon River to get to the Illinois and the Mississippi when he has himself a problem. He gets that boat stuck solid on a mill dam. So bad that it takes him 3 days to offload everything, float it over, and then reload it back up again. But in the process, he meets a number of folks that live in the bluffs above that mill, a place called New Salem. Now, friends, Abraham Lincoln will return to New Salem and spend the next 6 years of his life there. New Salem will leave an indelible mark on Lincoln and help him forge himself into the man he will become. At New Salem, Lincoln will complete his formal education. Less than 2 years, by the way. Twice he will fail as a businessman, and he will seek and receive his very first political office. Now, during this time, his reputation spreads throughout the region. Lincoln becomes known as the man you can trust. He's the guy you want on your side if there's a fight. And most important, in a pioneer community before the days of the internet, television, and God forbid, live streaming, Lincoln is known as the best storyteller for miles around. Matter of fact, folks in New Salem used to say that the reason his businesses kept failing was he was so busy telling stories he just never got around to selling anything. For instance, in one of his stories, he talks about a fisherman from right there in New Salem. A fella with such a reputation for stretching the truth that finally, in his own defense, he goes out and buys a set of scales. And he insists on weighing each and every fish he catches in front of witnesses. Well, sure enough, later that day, a baby is born in the log cabin next door. And the doctor comes over to borrow the fisherman's scales. Friends, that baby weighed 47 pounds. But it would be one of Lincoln's earliest dealings as a merchant that would set the course of his life. Now, he was always known as a soft touch, and one time he bought a barrel of mixed goods from a westbound pioneer family. And as he unloaded those goods to sell in his store, at the very bottom, he finds a full set of books, Blackstone's commentaries. Now, everyone knows that these books are the cornerstone for any lawyer's education. Now, Lincoln was the man who loved to read, right? We all know that. That's true. Right around this time, Lincoln said, "My best friend is the man who can lend me a book I've never read before." So, of course, he set to read in those books. And over the next 2 years, Abraham Lincoln taught himself the law. And in 1837, he moves to Springfield, Illinois to set up shop as a lawyer. Now, friends, if you wanted to make a living as a lawyer in Illinois in 1837, you had to travel. So he joins the 8th Judicial Circuit and travels all around central Illinois. Now, this is a group of about 25 lawyers who travel together with the judge. They go from town to town to town, take care of whatever legal business there is, and then they move on to the next town. Now, they would stay in these roadhouses or taverns, sort of the hotels of the era, if you will. And they were cold, cheerless, uncomfortable places. But the lawyers, they were a gregarious lot. They loved jokes and pranks and tall tales and of course, music. Music was a welcome relief from the tedium of the circuit. And Lincoln's friend, a banjo player named Ward Hill Layman, taught the lawyers a song that quickly became their very favorite. A simple pioneer melody with a great sing-along chorus called Who's Johnny. Now, when I researched Abraham Lincoln's life to write this show, I found out something that I just didn't even know about Lincoln. He was a musician. Lincoln played a musical instrument. Well, not a guitar. He played a simple instrument. This one. It's an old-time instrument that goes by many names. A Jew's harp, jaw harp, mouth harp, frog fiddle, Snoopy harp, Arkansas harp, gewgaw, geegaw, drumblah. Or, as I named it when it nearly took out my front tooth, the Tennessee Tooth Trasher. Now these things are found all around the world and came into Illinois with the earliest pioneers. So what I want to do right now is perform a song we know for a fact Abraham Lincoln used to sing. I will play it for you on an instrument that we know for a fact Lincoln used to perform on. So here we go. This is Who'sin' Johnny. Now the little black bolt come down the middle. Who'sin' Johnny? Who'sin' Johnny? That little black bolt come down the middle a long time ago. Long time ago. Long time ago. That little black bolt come down the middle a long time ago. Now first he stump and then he beller. Who'sin' Johnny? Who'sin' Johnny? First he jump and then he beller. Long time ago. Long time ago. Long time ago. First he jump and then he beller. Long time ago. Now he wet his horn on a white oak sapling. Who'sin' Johnny? Who'sin' Johnny? He wet his horn on a white oak sapling long time ago. Long time ago. Long time ago. He wet his horn on a white oak sapling long time ago. He pawed the dirt in the heifers' faces. Who'sin' Johnny? Who'sin' Johnny? He pawed the dirt in the heifers' faces long time ago. Long time ago, long time ago, he pawed the dirt in the heifers' faces long time ago. Now, if you ever want to play one of these, be very careful, because it can hurt you real bad if you don't do it right. Now I'm going to take just a moment to pause and check our feed, so I'll be right back. At any rate, as Lincoln's reputation as a lawyer begins to spread, of course, he begins to receive invitations to social events in Springfield, Illinois. It makes perfect sense. He's a likable fella. He loves conversation and jokes and stories. And sure enough, one day he gets an invitation to a dance at the most impressive house in all of Springfield, Illinois, the Edwards House. And it's there that Lincoln will meet the woman that changes his life forever. Her name was Miss Mary Todd of the Kentucky Todds, a very prominent name in Kentucky society. Now, Miss Mary Todd, by all accounts, was the most beautiful, socially prominent, and eligible bachelorette in all of Springfield. So just imagine her sitting along the wall with her girlfriends at that dance, dressed to the nines. She's got this gorgeous satin ball gown come from Paris, France. Her hair is done up in silk ribbons and live roses. And then there's Abraham Lincoln. Now, friends, if you've seen pictures of Lincoln at this time in his life, you'll know firsthand why they call him the Scarecrow. He had this coarse, stiff hair that would poke out and stick out at all different odd angles. Lord knows I feel his pain with that. But he was uncommonly large, as I've mentioned before. And in this time, he couldn't afford tailor-made clothes. So he's buying clothes right off the rack. His coat sleeves pull way up over his wrists. And they say his pant legs rode up so high, it looked like he was getting ready to cross a creek. And he had uncommonly long upper thigh bones. So he had this sort of odd, stork-like gait when he walked. He was by no means a graceful man. But he was so taken with that beautiful woman that he gathered up his courage and he walked right up to her and he said, "Ma'am, I would like to dance with you in the very worst way." Now, I can't say whether Mary was confounded or intrigued, but at any rate, she agrees. And they go out on the dance floor, they dance a beautiful waltz tune together. Now, you will recall that I mentioned that Abraham was not a graceful man. Well, friends, the sad fact of the matter was that he was a terrible dancer, and he stepped all over her feet the whole time. Well, finally, the song mercifully came to an end. He escorts her back to her chair, thanks her, and takes his leave. And all of her girlfriends start coming around because they wanted to know who she'd been dancing with. Now, Mary loved to brag. So she's telling all of her girlfriends about this new young lawyer, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, and how he came in so nice and polite, and he said how he wanted to dance with her in the very worst way. And then she took a moment to reflect on the number of times he'd stepped on her toes and added, for the benefit of her girlfriends, and he did dance in the worst way. Now, in Lincoln's day, all music was live. So you would have a string band playing, a fiddle player or two, maybe a banjo, and if you were really lucky, you had one of these. Now, friends, what I have here is an old hammer dulcimer, an antique instrument, an instrument that was built in a small town called Vermont, Illinois, right around, 50 miles or so from Springfield. It has 47 steel strings stretched across the top of it, and they're gathered in groups of 2 or 3. This one was built in the year of 1880, and it's exactly the way they sounded back in the day when Abraham and Mary Lincoln danced together. What I want to do right now is give you a taste of what it would have sounded like back then. Now, history did not record the name of the song. However, it did mention that it was a waltz tune. So I'm going to do an old waltz tune that was well known and loved throughout the region. Now, when I play this song, I want you to imagine this beautiful young woman dancing there with this big, gangly, horsey fella stepping all over her toes. So this is a tune you might recognize, the Westphalia Waltz. All right. Now, of course, Abraham Lincoln made Miss Mary Todd Mrs. Mary Lincoln. And as I mentioned, she was a remarkable woman in her age, uncommonly well educated. She spoke several languages, and she was highly opinionated and knowledgeable, not only on matters of society, but also on matters of politics. So once Abraham and her got together, and he mentioned that he might be interested in going back into politics, well, she was completely behind the idea. Unfortunately for Abraham, politics did not go well for him. He lost election after election after election. Now, all the politics in Lincoln's day circled around one subject: slavery. And while Lincoln always tried to walk a middle-of-the-road position of compromise politically, his personal feelings on slavery were quite clear. He was once heard to state, "Whenever I hear someone arguing for slavery, I have a strong desire to see it tried on him personally." Now, the popular music of the day reflected this ongoing debate, and one song in particular crystallized the abolitionist point of view. The song was "Darlin' Nellie Gray." This was a song written by a man named Benjamin Russell Hamby, and it was based on the true story of an escaped slave named Joseph Shelby. Shelby had escaped and traveled north on the Underground Railroad with hopes of not only winning his own freedom, but ultimately winning of the freedom of the woman that he had left in bondage deep in the South. Now, sadly, this didn't work out for him. Illness overcame him, and he died in the home of Hamby's father in Ohio, who was a member of the Underground Railroad. Now, Hamby heard the story and turned it into a song that combines the evils of slavery with the lamentations of unrequited love. And friends, he had a hit. Now, in the 1980s, I was documenting the oldest living musicians in the Illinois River Valley. And 130 years after this song was first written, folks in our state were still singing it. In that long green valley of that old Kentucky shore, where I whiled many happy hours away, just sitting and a-singing by the little cabin door, where lived my darling Nellie Gray. Oh, my darling Nellie Gray, they have taken you away. I'll never see my darling anymore. They've taken you to Georgia for to work your life away. Now you're gone from that old Kentucky shore. When the moon was in the heavens and the stars were shining bright, I would take my darling Nellie Gray. We'd float down the river in our little birch canoe, while my banjo so sweetly I would play. One day I went to find her, but she's gone, the neighbors say, for the white man has bound her in his chain. They've taken her to Georgia for to work her life away, as she toils in the cotton and the grain. Oh, my darling Nellie Gray, they have taken you away. I'll never see my darling anymore. They've taken you to Georgia for to work your life away. Now you're gone from that old Kentucky shore. Getting blinded and I cannot see the day. Hark, there's someone knocking at my door. I hear the angel calling, and I see my Nellie Gray. Fare thee well to my old Kentucky shore. Oh, my darling Nellie Gray, up in heaven there they say they'll never take you from me anymore. I'm coming, coming, coming while the angels clear the way. Fare thee well to my old Kentucky shore. Well, by the late 1850s, Abraham Lincoln has traveled across the country, speaking out against slavery wherever he goes. He's also conducted a landmark series of debates right back here in Illinois. Debates with the leading political figure of the day and a gentleman who was the former suitor to his now wife, the little giant, Stephen Douglas. Now, once again, these debates will cost Lincoln the election that he's running for. However, they springboard him into the national spotlight and help him win the presidency just 2 short years later. Now, they say that Lincoln was a plain-spoken debater, used everyday language, humor, and logic to make his point. Douglas, on the other hand, was a gifted orator, by many considered to be the greatest orator of the 19th century. He used flowery language, and he would whip the crowd into a frenzy, and he never hesitated to attack Lincoln personally. Matter of fact, at the debate down in Alton, Illinois, he accused Lincoln of being two-faced. Now, Abraham just waited until it was time for him to speak. And then he stood up, faced the audience, and said, "Friends, I put it to you good people here today. If I had another face, you think I'd wear this one?" Well, by 1860, Abraham Lincoln is universally recognized as the Western voice for a brand new political movement, the Republicans. And by the spring of that year, members of their wide awake branch, the Radical Group, well, they were seen marching through the streets of the nation in torchlit processions, wearing brightly painted oilcloth capes. And they were singing a brand new song written to the melody of the old Negro spiritual, "The old gray mare come tearing out the wilderness." Well, right about that time, Lincoln is returning to Springfield, Illinois after one of his political journeys. And as he walks down 8th Street towards his home, he's greeted by the sight of his 2 boys, Tad and Willie. They're out in the front yard marching around in a circle with little flags in each hand in a mock parade for their daddy. And they were singing that very song. Old Abe Lincoln came out of the wilderness, out of the wilderness, out of the wilderness. Old Abe Lincoln came out of the wilderness down in Illinois. And you know, friends, I've always felt that had to be one of Lincoln's proudest moments. But later that summer, a brand new song is written that will help Lincoln win the presidency. The song is written by Jesse Hutchinson of the Hutchinson Family Singers, the most important act of the era. Now, they were ardent abolitionists who took their message in concert to the theatrical halls across the nation, and they also performed for many of Abraham Lincoln's political events. Now, they used a common technique to write this song. They took a melody everyone already knew, the old fiddle tune, "Rosin the Bow." And then they simply added new words. So all you had to do was hand out sheets with the words printed on it. Everyone would immediately join in and sing. Now, this song became so popular that for all intent and purposes, it became Abraham Lincoln's campaign song. And that song is "Lincoln and Liberty." Hurrah for the choice of the nation, our chieftain so brave and so true. We'll go for the great Reformation, for Lincoln and liberty too. We'll go for the son of Kentucky, the hero of Hoosierdom through. The pride of the suckers so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty. David's sling is unerring. The Slavocrat's giant he slew. Then shout for the freedom preferring, for Lincoln and liberty too. They'll know what by felling and mauling our railmaker statesmen can do. For the people are everywhere calling for Lincoln and liberty too. Then up with a banner so glorious, the star-spangled red, white, and blue. We'll fight till the cause is victorious, for Lincoln and liberty too. Then up with a banner so glorious, the star-spangled red, white, and blue. We'll fight till the cause is victorious, for Lincoln and liberty too. Well, of course, Abraham Lincoln goes on to win the election and become our 16th president. As soon as he's president, the South secedes. And almost immediately after that, it's war. And this is not a war that goes well for the Union. They suffer a staggering series of defeats. By 1862, the entire country desperately needs a morale boost. Abraham and Mary Lincoln have just lost their little boy Willie to the typhoid fever, and a deep gloom settles in over the White House. By spring, it's apparent. If the war is to continue, more troops will be needed. So on July the 2nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln makes the first of two proclamations asking the nation for 300,000 more troops to serve for 3 years. Now, friends, he doesn't have long to wait for an answer. It comes on July the 16th in the form of a poem published on the front page of the New York Evening Post. It was titled 300,000 More. The words had been penned by an economist, James S. Gibbons, who'd been inspired by Lincoln's call to arms. And that poem swept the nation in a matter of days. While by August the 5th, when it was published in the Washington Star, it was already being sold in sheet music form. Ultimately, this song would go on to sell 2 million copies. Now, in an era when selling 3,000 copies of a song was considered a success, nothing like this had ever happened before. Not only would this song inspire a renewed zeal for the fight, but this is the first time we begin to see that deep personal connection that Abraham Lincoln is building with the common people of the North. We are coming, Father Abram, 600,000 more. From Mississippi's winding streams and from New England's shores, we leave our plows and workshops, our wives and children dear, with hearts too full for utterance, but with a single tear. We dare not look behind us, but steadfastly before. We are coming, Father Abram, 600,000 more. We are coming, coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abram, 600,000 more. If you look upon our hilltops that meet the northern skies, long moving lines of rising dust your vision may descry. And now the wind an instant tears a cloudy veil aside, and floats aloft our spangled flag in glory and in pride. And minutes in the sunlight gleam and bands play music pour. We are coming, Father Abram, 600,000 more. We are coming, coming, our union to restore. We are coming, Father Abram, 600,000 more. Now, Abraham Lincoln loved music of all kinds. And more than any president before him, he brings music into the White House. Music is a part of every state event. They have concerts on the White House lawn for the soldiers and the citizens of Washington to enjoy, performances in the residence for the family and friends. But more importantly, Lincoln uses music as this powerful tonic to pull himself out of these black moods of depression that he constantly faces during his years as president. And perhaps no more evidence is needed of the moving power of song than the words of a Confederate officer spoken just a few days after the war ended. He heard the Union men singing their songs, and at a break in one of the choruses, he hollered out from his cell. He says, "Gentlemen, why, if we'd had your songs, we'd have licked you out of your boots." But you know, friends, the South had songs of her own. And there was no song more popular or more powerful to the cause than Dixie. And here is where the story gets very interesting, because Dixie is one of Abraham Lincoln's favorite songs. You see, Dixie's not actually a Southern song. It was written by a Northerner, a man named Daniel Emmett. And it wasn't written as a sacred tribute to the sunny South either. Dixie was written as a minstrel song, a comedy song. But the best part of all is where it was written. New York City. Absolute truth. Now, the song did become incredibly popular down south when it was introduced at the Varieties Theater in New Orleans, Louisiana, as a march and drill routine featuring 40 female dancers. Now, Lincoln hears the song in Chicago in 1860. He likes it so much he stands right up and hollers out, "Let's have it again, boys! Let's have it again!" Then he has the song performed at his first presidential inauguration. Ironically enough, so does Jefferson Davis. Now, of course, when the war comes, the song becomes the Southern call to arms, and it takes on an almost religious fervence. But what I want to do for you this evening is perform the original song for you in its more raucous minstrel style. And I'm going to add the verses you never hear anymore. So this is the original version of that song, Dixie's Land. I wish I was in the land of cotton, old times there and not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland, where I was born, early on a frosty morning. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Oh, I wish I was in Dixie, away, away, in Dixieland. I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie. Now that's the verse everybody knows to this very day. But here are a couple of verses you have never heard before. Old Mrs. married Will the Weaver. Will, he was the gay deceiver. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And when he put his arms around her, he smiled fierce like a 40-pounder. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Oh, I wish I was in Dixie, away, away, in Dixieland. I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie. Ah, but there's still more. Now his face was sharp as a butcher's cleaver, but that did not seem to grieve her. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Old Mrs. played the foolish part to die for the man that broke her heart. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Oh, I wish I was in Dixie, away, away, in Dixieland. I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie, away, away, away down south of Dixie. Now, Abraham Lincoln loved musics of all kinds. And of course, music in his era reflected a wide range of styles and subjects, just like music today does. Of course, you had the minstrel songs, and Lincoln loved those best of all. Songs like Dixie, or the Blue Tail Fly, which many people consider his very favorite of all, or as I knew it as a kid, Jimmy Crack Corn. You had those beautiful love songs, songs like Lorena or Aurelie, that would tug at the heartstrings and sing of home and hearth. And you also had those patriotic numbers like the Battle Cry of Freedom that I opened the show with, or the Battle Hymn of the Republic that would inspire the nation. But you know, friends, as that never-ending war dragged on and on, it was a song from another of Lincoln's very favorite songwriters, Stephen Foster, that expressed the mood of an exhausted nation on both sides, North and South. Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many woes, while we all sorrow with the poor. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Whoa, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Whoa, hard times come again no more. We seek mirth and beauty and music light and gay. There are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks still say, whoa, hard times come again no more. 'Tis a song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Whoa, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Whoa, hard times come again no more. Whoa, hard times come again no more. Well, Good Friday of 1865 was indeed a glorious day in Washington, D.C. The sun shone in a brilliant blue sky. That afternoon, as Abraham and Mary Lincoln went for their carriage ride in the countryside surrounding Washington, they held hands. And Lincoln's guard would later state that the president seemed at peace for the first time in years. Abraham spoke to Mary about the things they would do back in Springfield, Illinois, once the days of the presidency were over. And you know, friends, they also talked about their plans for that evening. They were going to go see the play, Our American Cousin, down at Ford's Theater. Abraham told Mary he didn't really want to go. He just wanted to stay at home and be with the family. But she had mentioned that it had been printed in the papers that the president would make an appearance, and surely the people would want to see him, today of all days. So he agreed. And that decision would cost Abraham Lincoln his life. In the early morning hours, approximately 7:10 a.m. of April the 15th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln, mortally wounded by the hand of the assassin John Wilkes Booth, he passed on to be one with the ages. Now, friends, Abraham Lincoln's passing would touch the nation like nothing before ever had. On both sides, by the way, North and South. The country was exhausted from the war. They wanted no more of this madness. And they say that as the funeral train bearing Lincoln's remains slowly wound its way across the country, ironically enough retracing the very steps he'd taken just 4 short years earlier, that quite literally millions of everyday Americans like you or me just went out to stand by the tracks and watch it pass. One of those folks was a young woman named Laura Geddes. She was a student at the Illinois School for Teachers at Normal. She saw that funeral train pass and wrote about it in a letter home to her mother. The letter was handed down from generation to generation to generation. A couple of years back, I got a chance to read it, and I want to share her exact words with you here this evening. My dear mother, this has been a week long to be remembered at Normal. On Wednesday morning, the funeral train bearing the remains of our lamented president passed through our little village on the way to its final resting place. The station house was draped in mourning, and there were several appropriate mottos. They raised an arch over the track. It was all wreathed in cedar and white plum blossom. And across it was the motto, "Go to thy rest." The lady students got up a wreath of the most beautiful flowers I ever saw to be placed on the coffin. On a card was written, "Here is a man whose like we shall never see again." The train was to come at 4, and by that time all Normal and the neighborhood around were there waiting. It was nearly 5 when the first engine came. It's always 10 minutes ahead. It had a life-size picture of the president in front and was draped in mourning. Then the train soon hove into sight. It stopped at where the roads cross, and the wreath was put on. There was 8 or 10 cars, all covered with black and white, little flags on each car with black and white streamers. A large picture of the president on the engine in front, like the first engine. The car the coffin was on was almost black and covered with black and white. Mr. Edwards said it was built in Virginia and presented to the president only a few days before he died for it to come to the fair in Chicago in. It was all iron. There were soldiers standing guard at each car door, before and behind. The head of each man was uncovered till the last car passed under the arch. All stood silently watching as the cars wound slowly round the hill, out of sight. Go to thy rest. On the 21st of April, 1865, 3:31 left Washington for Lincoln's last train ride. Cannons boomed, on fires burned the evergreen war crate. 3:31 in the morning sun did her sad journey make. See that train coming, boys, rolling down the main. Draped in black, she won't be back, it's Lincoln's funeral train. With a portrait of the martyred man shot down by a traitor, now toll the bell and bid farewell to the great emancipator. Crowds gathered round for a final look at the great man who had stood at the country's helm through the bitter war that seemed a little good. Fell down the bullet of John Wilkes Booth as the battle died away, his guiding spirit to reconcile by absence brought dismay. See that train coming, boys, rolling down the main. Draped in black, she won't be back, it's Lincoln's funeral train. With a portrait of the martyred man shot down by a traitor, now toll the bell and bid farewell to the great emancipator. Now toll the bell and bid farewell to the great emancipator. Now, of course, these days, we view Abraham Lincoln through the lens of history. And if I asked any of you folks streaming out there tonight about Lincoln, I'm sure I would hear comments like, our greatest president, a self-made man, a masterful politician. And boy, that's a fact. Here is a man who single-handedly led the nation through our darkest trial by fire, the American Civil War. And in the process, he not only saved the Union, but he managed to free the nation of that scourge of slavery that had bound us the 77 years ago that Lincoln spoke of at Gettysburg. Now, as wonderful as those accomplishments are, in my mind, that's not what sets Lincoln apart from leaders of his day, or even ours. To me, it's Lincoln's uncommon sense of dignity and decency and humanity in an era where the politics was so vicious and nasty it makes today's mudslinging fake news tactics look like a walk in the park by comparison. And you know, there is one example that I believe sums up Abraham Lincoln perfectly. It happened the day the war ended. Lincoln broke the news of Lee's surrender with a simple gesture. Now, friends, this is not a gesture of retribution against the crushed and fallen rebels. Oh, no. This was a gesture of reconciliation, of welcoming the Southern brothers back into the family of the nation. And to me, that speaks volumes about Abraham Lincoln, the man. Now, that gesture was preserved in the form of a song written by one of Illinois' greatest songwriters, Bob Gibson. And it seems like the perfect way to end a musical journey through Abraham Lincoln's life. The word was run from Richmond in that fading April sun. Lee had handed Grant his sword, and the war was finally won. To the streets the people spilled, feeling the excitement build as the crowd around the White House milled. asking was it true, it's finally done. Inside the White House, Lincoln heard them calling out his name. Sat there wondering what to say to ease their years of pain. Someone yelled, "Come out the door, tell us what you've got in store for the rebels who have lost the war." So out onto the porch Abe Lincoln came. He said, "We are gathered not in anger, but in celebration. Let's be grateful we are once again a single nation. Let's stand together reassured, now that peace has been secured, our nation's illness can be cured. I suggest the overture for this occasion." He said, "Let the band play Dixie, play that tune that holds its head up high and proud, and let our nation once divided, bloody but unbound, take the swords of war and beat them back into a plow. On the day that we surrendered, Mr. Lincoln told the crowd, let the band play Dixie. Let the band play Dixie." All right, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Abraham Lincoln in song. I hope you enjoyed the music and maybe learned a little bit about Abraham Lincoln. Once again, a very special thanks to the Looking for Lincoln Heritage Coalition and the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area, particularly Sarah Watson and Heather Wickens, who do wonderful work. And as the time comes that we're able to come together, I hope you'll take the opportunity to visit all of the different Lincoln sites in our state. We have a wonderful collection of history right here about one of the greatest leaders in the world. There is a donation button on the link. If anyone cares to make a tip for the program, that's graciously appreciated. And stay connected. Take care of one another. We will get through this together. So I'm going to take a moment to check out the Facebook comments. Please feel free to say something, and I'll be in touch. So until I can see you in person again, thank you so much for coming, and safe travels. Good night, everybody.